Bonjour, my name is Alice, welcome back to my channel. We've talked a lot about the manosphere on YouTube, especially in the commentary, video essay sphere. One thing that really stood out for me, the conclusion to most of the videos on this topic, was the need for men to create and relate to healthier forms of masculinity. I remember feeling optimistic to see more and more creators embody those ideas. I was convinced that it was men's job to create a movement of healthy boys only. You know, I often hear that feminism doesn't care about men, which is absolutely not true. Feminists have been extending a hand to men since the inception of the movement. Feminism has never been just about women. It's a social project that benefits all of us, including men. So this time I thought, men are going to do the work. They're going to figure it out by themselves. Now I risk appearing as pessimistic, but men promoting healthy forms of masculinity have existed for a very long time, and it hasn't worked. Since the 1960s, men's movements have appeared and disappeared. They all started with good intentions and transformed into some weird anti-feminist groups similar to today's men's rights movement. For instance, I recently came across a video from an increasingly popular French left-leaning channel called Blast. The interviewer had invited Pablo Servigne, the founder of collapsology, a branch of the climate movement that works on predicting the end of the world. I found Servigne really charismatic, calm, in touch with his emotions. As a scientist, he talked about the roles of emotions in social movements and in communicating science to the masses. He distanced himself from the authoritative figure of the facts of a failing scientist to embrace a more humane approach. Wow, I thought, that's healthy masculinity on full display. That makes me optimistic. I immediately sent the video to a bunch of male friends on the group chat we have, and I was immediately calmed down. To put it shortly, Pablo Servigne is a bit weird. Let me explain why. First of all, the guy predicted the end of the world for 2020. I have a clip of him saying it in case he wants to accuse me of defamation. You said it, Pablo. But if we take him seriously, because many people take him very seriously, his books are bestsellers. Pablo investigated how we can prepare ourselves for the end of the world. The tone of his books is catastrophic, but it's not just about him. We as a society feel very pessimistic when it comes to anticipating the future. Timothée Chalamet, the only scientist I truly listen to, said in an interview that societal collapse was in the air. We are fucked. Depressed. Books we write, the films we make, everything is super depressive, super apocalyptic. So obviously collapsology, the scientific version of the 2012 movie, is going to be popular. We'll have time to go more in depth into the theorization of societal collapse and how concerning it is in other videos, but for today I just want to focus on when the manosphere meets the climate movement. But before that, I'd like to introduce you to today's sponsor, The Guardian. The Guardian Weekly is kindly sponsoring this video today. I've learned a lot from it. I've been receiving those issues for more than a year now. What I like about it, the magazine format, is that you can touch it. It's easier for me to retain the information, to really engage with the information. Most of the articles you'll find in it are already published, but they are compiled in this very cool issue. You also have some exclusive features like the global reports, where you get an overview of what's been happening in the world from the west to the east. Those magazines really help me connect the dots and also learn about bigger issues. So, for example, in this one, they have a big story on the World Cup. I don't always agree with their journalists' analysis, but you know, it remains challenging. It helps me keep track with geopolitics, diplomatic issues. Now, if you or a friend think that you could benefit from receiving this weekly issue, I have a very cool offer for you. If you go and click on the link in the description box, you'll get 50% off a gifted subscription. So thank you to The Guardian for sponsoring the video, and now let's go back to it. Philosopher Francis Bacon advocated in the 16th century for the submission of nature to the reign of man through technology, knowledge and power. Since then, not much has changed really. We are now facing the aftermath of taking, using, throwing away for centuries, but it extends beyond nature. The way we treat human beings, kids, marginalized groups is very similar in a way. Ecofeminists, for instance, have found a connection between the domination of men over nature and the domination of men over women. The conquest of land, for example, is very often synonymous with the abuse of women, and abuse is clearly a euphemism here. In many societies across the globe, governments control society through the control of women's sexuality. See what's been happening in Iran, or what someone like Jordan Peterson says regarding enforced monogamy. Now, if sexuality is not controlled, regulated, it is turned into a sort of cultural entity. The Guerrilla Girls showed that 85% of the nudes in the Met Museum are female, and pregnancy is still sacralized on magazine covers, etc., etc. In literature, womanhood is very often used as a metaphor for the land, a country, ecosystems. It's very true in Irish literature, for example. I did a whole essay on that for uni. In fact, when we look at the climate movement today, it's surprising, actually not that surprising, that the majority of it is constituted of women, especially its leaders. Caring for the environment and caring in general is considered women's business, a feminine value. In fact, in the history of feminism, women have appropriated this idea that feminine equals care to advance their cause. Some section of the US suffrage movement capitalized on the existence of male and female distinct values to demand the right to vote. Middle-class American women advocated for their involvement in politics as a way to counterbalance the predominance of masculine values in society. This form of cultural feminism, that's how it's called, doesn't seek to abolish patriarchy altogether, but instead to find a sort of balance between men and women, the feminine and the masculine. On an individual, societal, universal level, both forces have to be present and work together. Now, what do you think those male and female values are? Well, the feminine is receptive, stationary, cooperative, and nurturing. The masculine, on the other hand, is competitive, creative, and dynamic. Cultural feminists recognize that each individual can be a mix of different energies. A man can be nurturing, a woman can be aggressive, but in the end, the incentive is to make your energy coincide with your gender at birth. On social media, for instance, the popularity of New Age spirituality has helped in spreading the belief in feminine versus masculine energy. The issue, though, is that having masculine energy as a woman is always framed as something bad, something you need to get rid of. Also, in one of her video essays, Tinoir noticed that most of the tutorials explaining how to develop your femininity more often are not translated into developing a feminine aesthetic, so looking feminine. In other words, the language of spirituality is used to reinforce gender binaries, and it therefore cancels irregularities. Those influences operate at the individual level, they belong to the world of self-help. However, what they promote is coherent with a vision of politics of the world that I personally find very regressive. So who are the cultural feminists? How can I spot them? Well, they can be anywhere. Some eco-feminists are motivated by a so-called feminine essence, meaning that female values and by extension females will save the world. TERFs are also quite close to this mode of thinking because they refuse to see trans women as women because they don't have the reproductive system of the majority of women and they weren't socialized as women, therefore they don't have those essential feminine values. They are perceived as some sort of undercover agents of patriarchy that are going to destroy the movement from within. Similarly to New Age influences, many TERFs also use the aesthetic of Gaia, basically, cottagecore starter pack, more or less. So long dresses, long hair, the flowers, etc. But more generally, when you hear someone say that if only women rule the world, then there wouldn't be any wars, or when Hillary Clinton says that every time a woman is elected to head of state or government, that is a step forward in reference to Melanie's potential win. Well, this kind of follows the same logic that women naturally carry with them feminine values that are only positive. I'm not saying that representation doesn't matter, it really does. But sacralizing women uncritically is not good at all. After all, Hillary Clinton, who's sometimes described as a feminist icon, is a war fanatic. She loves war. She loves to get involved in them. Whether it's on the individual level or the societal level, cultural feminism implies that in order to improve society, and in the case of the climate crisis, save the world, we have to take a distance from the chaos of party politics to change our whole culture. What is wrong with that, you might be asking? What is wrong with wanting to change the culture? You know, when we talk about something like getting rid of toxic masculinity, we don't talk about a precise political project. We talk about a change in culture. So what is the difference between an essentialist cultural feminist and a post-Me Too feminist? In fact, if we take the example of Me Too, the movement has revealed that sexual violence happens everywhere, in left-wing circles, in right-wing circles. It led many women to kind of reject politics, party politics overall. Does that mean that all these women are essentialists, cultural feminists? No, not at all. What Me Too did is that it started a conversation on the existence of an oppressed class of women above politics. In France, the hashtag Relève Féministe is an example of that. Historically, the belief in the existence of a sex class is characteristic of radical feminism. In Daring to be Bad, Alice Echols explains that in the second half of the 20th century, American radical feminism was a political movement that dared to be bad, in the sense that it wanted to eradicate male supremacy. According to her, cultural feminism grew out of radical feminism to instead create a sort of female counterculture that would nurture feminine values. So today, when we use radical feminism as a synonym for TERFs, we actually insult what radical feminism really is. Now, what about the boys? That is the case for the feminine energy. You'll find a bunch of videos on how to develop your masculine energy as a man. Again, the world of self-help and New Age spirituality has taken over the task of leading men towards better forms of masculinity. As with cultural feminism, the idea isn't to cancel masculinity, but to find a balance, a sort of healthy masculinity against toxic masculinity. Jordan Peterson, a guy who teaches men how to have values according to French TERF superstar Dora Muto, has indeed found success among young male adults seeking to become real men. Peterson, a psychologist, believes in the existence of masculine and feminine values, different but equally valuable, according to him. What he says isn't revolutionary, it just resonates with a lot of people right now. But the belief that we need to restore masculinity is very old as the belief that masculinity is actually in crisis. When taking a look at history, as researcher Judith did, it appears that men have always been in crisis and that society is becoming more and more feminized. Interestingly, the term toxic masculinity was invented by a group of men, the mythopoetic men's movement in the 1980s. It stipulated that because of neoliberalism, and they don't say it, but feminism, men had become immature and selfish. They were incapable of communicating emotions and also became feminized. The mythopoetic movement therefore organized rituals, gatherings exclusive to men and inspired by tribal societies. The goal was to reconnect with manhood, deep masculinity, through spirituality and sharing emotions from men to men. However, like cultural feminists, the movement understood gender and the relationships between the sexes in a very essentialist way. It promotes a return to a state of nature where men and women got along with each other, lived in harmony. Those ideas are almost copied and pasted in Pablo Servine's books. For example, Servine praises the Manhood project, an organization that works very similarly to the mythopoetic men's movement. The Manhood project was created in the US in the 1980s and has gained popularity in France. Since then, it's been criticized by many for its cultish aspects and the consequences it has had on its participants. So how does it work? Well, during a prolonged weekend, men are isolated from the world without any cell phone, money, car keys. Their names are replaced by numbers, they only get 4 or 5 hours of sleep, eat very little, have to get naked for long periods of time, and are also forced to share childhood traumas. The retreat has been traumatic for many participants and their relatives, their families. A relative, for example, shared that when her partner came back, he became very aggressive, very commanding. He demanded divorce and was very strict with the children. This experience is strangely coherent with what happens to a lot of men who go to men-only events, men-only gatherings for long periods of time. In his book titled The Crisis of Masculinity, Professor Francis Dupuis-Déri looked at a variety of men's movements in Europe and North America and came to the sad conclusion that those groups, even if they started with very good intentions, almost systematically became very toxic. Some of these movements started as pro-feminists, they wanted to deconstruct masculinity, they wanted to help men who had been violent, but unfortunately, putting a bunch of men in the same room to talk about how they oppress women or how they're violent had the opposite effect. Participants quickly find excuses, put the blame on women, on feminists, for wanting to change what it means to be a man. You know, what if they were the victims? Now the rhetoric of the crisis of masculinity or the need to restore deep masculinity becomes even more effective in the context of the climate crisis. If society is on the verge of societal collapse, then it becomes urgent to forge the culture that will help us live through it. In his books, Pablo Servine defends that mutual aid is going to help us get through the collapse. More precisely, Servine wants men and women to reconcile and live in harmony. He presents himself as some sort of anti-toxic masculinity guru, claiming that men need to embrace their feminine side. In fact, that's precisely what most men's movements started as, but what happens behind closed doors? What happens when women aren't part of the conversation anymore? I'm not gonna lie, it's really hard to criticize people like Pablo Servine or other positive masculinity gurus because they are doing something great. They are helping man. In the case of Pablo, people will say that he's innocent, he's in touch with his emotions. I mean, look at him. He looks like a cute tofu-eating Che Guevara. But you know what? I really don't want to see him or people like him at the forefront of the climate movement. Honestly, I really don't want people to read his books on what the future could look like post-collapse. Because I don't trust him. I mean, first of all, the guy lied to us about the end of the world. That's very naughty. And because I don't want a world based on some sort of feminine versus masculine energy. That's very essentialist, and as we've shown throughout the video, it naturally excludes those who don't conform to gender binaries, even if that wasn't the intention in the first place. You know, it's not surprising to me that while the climate movement is clearly diversifying, the world of collapsology, survivalism, is still very white, still very manly. My vision of what the climate justice movement should be is very different. The movement should be action-oriented, deeply political, not cultural, inclusive, and connected to social justice. The rhetoric of societal collapse, replacement, decline has been used and abused by the wrong people. Conservatives, fascists, white supremacists. So it's something we have to be extremely cautious about. We are forced to face huge transformations because of the climate crisis. But it's in our power to frame it as something positive. We can redefine what growth means. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, we can continue the discussion in the comments section. Don't forget to like, to subscribe, if it's not done already. I would like to thank The Guardian for sponsoring the video. I would like to thank my Patreons for their support. You'll find a link in the description box if you want to support the channel. And a special thank you to Donage, Alex, Sam, Manuel, Dakota, Jay, Benjamin, Oswald, and Carla. And yep. I'll see you very soon. Salut!